11:45 is not a hard stop for us, but people will start trying to enter the room and come in for different things.
Yeah.
Around 11:45, so that's about when we should wrap.
I think I should be done by then. And let me thank you today for organizing this, for having us over. I didn't say it yesterday. So you have seen quite a bit of 3D-EPI through yesterday and today. I'm just going to discuss a few more things. Some things are repeats. Maybe I'll go a little bit faster with those. Like I mentioned, I'm from the Highfield group of the University Medical Center in Utrecht.
I'm so sorry, but the version of your screen is showing me the and not that one. You go into your Zoom.
Sorry, guys.
Share options, yeah. And just click on that, new share, and then just click screen two, and share that. And we will just edit this part of the video out in a minute. And back to what we were doing.
Okay. So cursor is visible. No. The screen is yes, but not my cursor. Okay, so basically this is a picture of the entire Utrecht University. It's actually just to give you an idea of where I'm coming from. It's quite big. The University Medical Center is there, which is also quite big. Here's another view of it. Or not. I think my screen is frozen now with this new thing.
Oh, no. We say technology is good. You could do it. Yeah, I think we do need to be in Toronto here.
Something happened.
I'll stand here and it'll just keep working.
Right. So this is, but the picture looks a bit weird. Anyway, we'll see. So this is the actual medical center. It's a research hospital. So this whole part that you see here is the research part, and the L-shaped buildings at the back is where the patients are. And somewhere in the far corner is our MR center. And we're very proud of our babies. The 70 Dust is a workforce of our laminar femoral at the moment, and soon we're expecting its brother or sister, which is a smaller footing 7 Tesla new generation scanner. Just a little bit about us. But I'm here to talk to you about 3D-EPI and not the UMCU. So I will discuss in the beginning some general properties of 3D-EPI in essence in comparison with 2D-EPI, just to give you a feeling of the benefits and of the properties basically of the two kinds of scans. Some discussion on how we can accelerate our 3D-EPI, because we always want speed and resolution, just one is not enough. Then some basics of image quality, signal to noise, what bold signals you expect to see, although you have seen that through the previous days, and just a couple more examples from the literature. But before that, just a little bit of history about 3D and EPI, which actually started as EVI, echo-volume imaging, from Mansfield in the 70s. And he actually got the Nobel Prize for this concept in 2013. So within those 20, it actually took 20 years for the first fMRI experiments with EVI to be performed. But in essence, it's a very, very old concept and a very successful one, as you see. So EPI and EVI are, in essence, roughly the same. I'll explain more differences later on. So what's the difference? A key difference between 2D-EPI and 3D-EPI is the actual excitation of your slice or slab. So in 2D, we excite slices in a sequence, and then we repeat this pattern. You know this very well. In 3D, we excite an entire slab every time for every TR. So it's a volumetric acquisition. There's a couple of good things. There's a major good thing about this is that the slices within your slab are perfectly or almost perfectly defined. So this is ideal for sub-millimeter resolutions, particularly in the slice direction, if you will. But the slab profile is imperfect. So you have a little bit of a leakage basically at the edges of your slab, and typically we need to oversample a little bit in that direction by about 10%. Other key differences is that we have small RF, small flip angles, which means low SAR, quite beneficial, especially if you consider it in the concept of multiband, for instance, where you have much more RF demands. Practically, of course, you do get slices within your 3D slab, but those are encoded with a second phase encode gradient, as opposed to your conventional slice select method. And we can undersample in two directions. So along the slice, which I refer to as KZ, and within the plane in the phase encoding direction, so along KY. So it can be quite fast. This is just a sequence diagram, which you probably are quite familiar with. So slice excitation versus volume excitation. You have your readout, you have your phase encode, those are similar. But then in the 2D case, you excite the slice, repeat this as many slices as you want to require, while you have the second phase encode that I just discussed in your Z plane. A key difference here by convention is that the TR for the 2D situation is defined as the time between acquiring the same slice. So let's say whatever, a couple of seconds. In the 3D situation, your TR is the time between excitations. And in principle, this is much shorter. So in the order of a few milliseconds. It's, yeah. If you look at this in K-space, so just to orient you a little bit, again, it's a little bit of a convention. I'm going to show you the KY, phase encode, KX, readout. So this is the plane, slice goes like this. It's flipped in the 3D scenario. So in the 2D situation, we have the back and forth acquisition of K-space, like so. I think we discussed it yesterday as well, right? And you repeat that many, many times to continue acquiring your slices. In the 3D situation, we have a 3D K-space. Now my plane is flipped, just by convention of how we typically present the 3D-EPI scenario. Then you blip up with your second phase of code, and you repeat this as many times as you need to complete your volume. Because in principle, I mean, once they're finalized, you still have a cube in both situations. But the construction is different. So in the 2D case, you do a 2D reconstruction in the 2D Fourier transform, while in the 3D case, you need a 3D Fourier transform. And if you don't unassemble, the TR would be, or the time it takes to acquire the entire volume basically is would be about the same for the two cases. Now, a little bit about undersampling. Like I mentioned before, you can very easily undersample in two directions. This is again the same K-space that we were looking at before. It's very busy in this case, our 3D K-space. So we have readouts, first phase of code, that's your slice, number of slices. This is what it would look like in the fully sampled situation. But you can accelerate very easily, like I said, in two directions, either using Grappa or Sense, depending on what your vendor provides, and then you can end up with a much more undersampled situation. This is a 2x2 undersampling or 2x2 acceleration. So that gives you a lot of speed. And it's caught in my colleague Ben's poster in this case. He was very excited about this. He did a lot of the work with the 3D-EPI for a few years already. So the acceleration that you get if you speed up along the slice is equivalent to the acceleration factor. And this was not possible basically with 2D until the multiband or simultaneous multi-slice application came about. It's actually a very efficient acquisition in terms of time. This is an example from the earlier days for a 3x3 acceleration. This is with grappa, but you can get something similar with sense. So you, for a whole brain acquisition, 1 millimeter isotropic, which is pretty good actually already. You can do a lot of depth-dependent analysis with that as well in 3.2 seconds. Now, of course, there's newer ways to accelerate this. For example, the caipirinha. Just briefly to give you an idea of what the difference is between the conventional sense or grappa. I'm working with sense mostly, some examples are sense-based. Your readout goes into the board. That's your first phase of code, the slide, and sorry, in this direction is the number of slides. So when you do this 2x2 undersampling or acceleration, you skip full readout line and then you skip several points along the slide direction. With caipirinha, in essence, you just shift one of these lines by a certain amount. In this illustration, by a point. So what does this do? It actually changes the aliasing that you get. So every time you do an acceleration, in essence, you create a lot of aliasing. You skip points, so you create a lot of aliasing in your images. So if you would use a conventional graph or sense, you have a lot of folding of your sample, which can be very difficult to reconstruct. To reconstruct this image, you, in essence, capitalize on the fact that you have multiple channels in your receiver coil, and that helps you have proper weight to know where your, the intensity of your sample came from. I really want to discuss this at length at the moment. But in the caipirinha situation, because you have this shift, you can actually move your aliasing around, so the folding that you have in the end is much less. So less overlap, easier to extract, to reconstruct your image back. So with this, you can accelerate even further. This is more recent work by Natalia and colleagues. So this is pushed further now. It's an example with 2x5 whole brain, 1 millimeter isotropic again. But now, if you see the acceleration is about the tiny text of the entire volume to be acquired, it's about half. Looks noisy in this situation, we push it too much. While in the caipirinha situation, the noise is greatly reduced. Are there any questions so far? Where is the Z direction in this case? I think it's, yeah, I think it's 5 actually. Yeah. Yes.
If people compare with grapha 5x2, but we have less aliasing and all of that.
Yeah. I'm not sure actually. I would have to look at the paper again. Yeah, I'm not sure. Right. Now, finally, some sub-millimeter work, also by Ben Foster again. A different kind of acceleration, but again, very high, 4x4 in both directions. 0.8 millimeters isotropic with whole brain coverage in 2 seconds. I think this is actually pretty good. Of course, not everyone has caipirinha implemented, I think. I'm actually curious to hear, but it's not something that's standard. So what we do in a standard way at the moment is a couple of things. The first is to actually acquire a limited field of view to be able to have a high spatial resolution within a reasonable volume acquisition time. There's some examples from different groups and different locations in the brain, visual cortex, motor cortex from Renzo, and a zoomed version that you can implement, that is already implemented in the Siemens system by the Maastricht group. And I guess on average, what you see with this approach in the literature is around 0.8 isotropic resolution, or sometimes the slice can be thicker, it depends. Acceleration with a standard head coil is anywhere between 3 and 5, and volume acquisition is around 4 seconds typically. And my favorite method is to actually use surface coils to push the resolution further. So, of course, the moment you increase your resolution, you lose SNR, so you need to do something about it. One of the things you can do about it is to use a surface coil. This is one of our earlier examples with a 3D-EPI. You see there, with still a limited field of view, of course, it's a surface coil, but that's a much higher spatial resolution now, 0.55 millimeters or earlier work. I personally like this image very much. Okay, back to case space. So in practice, 3D-EPI is a multi-shot segmented acquisition. The EVI I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation is a single shot acquisition. The entire volume goes in one go. But with 3D-EPI, like I showed you earlier, you have an excitation, you acquire a plane, get another excitation, acquire the next plane, and so on and so forth. And each plane, after each shot excitation, is a segment. So you have a segmented multi-shot acquisition. And for some vendors, each plane, for Philips in particular, each plane can have more than one segment, which can be quite beneficial because your readouts are shorter. You can have reduced geometric distortions, and it's a little bit easier to do very high resolutions because your T is manageable. It's within the range that you want for your bold signal change. Of course, there's downsides to segmented acquisitions. In general, that they're more susceptible to motion, and they have more susceptible to temporal noise. First, a little bit about the benefits, the less distortions that I discussed, and this is again in comparison with what you may expect to have with 2D-EPI. You already heard a lot about the distortion issues, so it's still problems, but as compared to 2D-EPI, it's better. And this is just a visual of the same participant to just give you an idea of that it can come actually pretty close on average. And this is a more quantitative comparison that Alessio did a few years ago on comparing the T1 anatomy with 3D-EPI. How well can you do in segmentations and laminar definition on your 3D-EPI as compared to the T1 anatomy. In this case, I'm showing you, I'm including the phase data as well, in addition to the magnitude. So the image on the right is a susceptibility weighted image. And what that does is gives you a little bit more contrast between gray and white matter. And I think you, Renzo, use a similar approach quite often as well. And the red dots highlight the same locations on both images. So by visual inspection is pretty close. But as Camille said, don't trust your eyes only, do some metrics. So Alessio went ahead and did the segmentations on both kinds of contrasts, and then compared the cortical depth estimates between the two modalities. And this is the result. The cortical depth estimate on the T1 weighted scan and the range basically, and from the 3D-EPI. And they're pretty close, as you can see, with the exception of the bias towards the bias surface on the 3D-EPI. So basically, this is again in line with what Camille was showing earlier, that the highest error you get if you use your T1 weighted scan for a segmentation and subsequent layer unification is towards the bias surface. But overall, your distortion is actually quite good as compared to the 2D scenario.
Sorry, to make if I found out that the reason why it's better is because it's segmented within cases.
Yeah. But overall, you could, yes. But is that also standard, or is not?
That's not coming up.
Yeah.
It's just one time.
Yeah, correct.
It's a
Yeah.
segmentation.
Yeah. But you do have a point. There's things evolving to actually solve problems on one kind of scan and solve problems on the other kind of scan. That is true.
Do we believe one of the measurements here better than the other?
No. I'm just trying to illustrate the properties basically of the scans. But no, I wouldn't say one is better than the other. And actually, Camille explained that quite in detail before me. It's a lot of things to be mindful about. So the next point is signal to noise. So inherently, basically, that's a good one, actually. SNR, can't beat that. Your SNR with 3D is always higher than 2D. And this is intuitive because you excite many more space. You have a slab as compared to a slice. So you always have a higher SNR 3D. But for fMRI, we don't care about the image SNR, we care about the temporal SNR. And the temporal SNR has a lot of other unwanted things in it. We have noise from the scanner, thermal noise, people move, breathing, heartbeat, and your data may end up looking like they're moved over there. So you have a lot of things interfering. So what's happening in this case? That's two examples of what a good and bad SNR will do to your data. This is a small field of view. This is an SNR going from the scale for this visualization between 10 and above 30. This is visual cortices, you can see axial view. So in the viewer colors with this very good SNR, then your fMRI signal comes out from the noise. So of course detectability is better. If I have a bad SNR, the opposite happens. This is the temporal SNR, right? And this is also, as a side note, with behavior without behavior. Squeeze that in. So temporal SNR is really, really important. We want to have as high temporal SNR as possible. Good one, obviously. In this example, yes, but of course there could be all the other things that I discussed. You can have subject motion, heart rate, breathing, or other issues that affect the temporal SNR. In this case, it was acceleration of 7, so it was the noise was only because of the undersampling in this particular example.
This was a deal with small.
Yes.
And that was only the type of SNF7.
3D copy. So it's 3D-EPI with 2-dimensional comparing. Yes, that's it. And it's an example of 0.8 again, just for reference. Move on. Sorry.
The country is on the right side?
On the left side.
On the left side?
Yeah.
I understand.
We really pushed it, that's why it's so bad. But I want to use this example to illustrate that good means good signal, bad means noise normalization. But can also illustrate what you can do with undersampling schemes as well. But another good thing with increasing resolution is that the higher your spatial resolution, the less noise you have coming from the subject. So the less heart rate and breathing artifacts you're going to get in your signal. So basically, this is work from thing in the earlier days, just comparing the temporal signal to noise and different field strengths and different solutions. We are here. So in this domain, the temporal SNR is in essence equal to your image SNR. So here along this line, this is what this line indicates, where the two signal to noise ratios are the same. And as a slide from Renzo that I got from Ben. So now we're suddenly in a good shape because, like I said before, 3D, your image SNR is always higher. So suddenly you're in that domain where 3D-EPI is starting to become more beneficial compared to the 2D-EPI. So very high resolution with 3D gives you more signals, and we really, really, really want to have more signals because we're SNR starved, basically. Those are some examples of different resolutions. 3 millimeter, 1.5, which is a good place to be for Simon Tesla with a standard head foil. And then if you start pushing, then you really need your 3D to give you more sensitivity, basically. We can also do other tricks to correct for physiological noise coming from the subject. You can just do a noise correction, retrocore or something similar. So that's there's a lot of tools out there to improve the stability. And anyway, I've worked from European colleagues, just a comparison of noise correction for 2D scenario, and scenario there, and 3D scenario. So you can actually improve your data if you wish. It's a visual example of what I just discussed. So noise correction can help you, particularly in difficult locations in the brain where you expect to have more noise coming from the subject. Retro iCore, but there's really so many ways to do it. You can do ICA-based correction. There's a lot of tools to remove physiological noise.
Like in 3D, you don't have a snapshot acquisition anymore, right? Like you usually assuming this physiological noise correction. You have a longer readout and different parts in case space might be in different phases of your study cycle.
Yeah,
How
it could be.
You recommend to the company?
Well, you can't really. If it's already blurred in there, it's already blurred in there. But like I said a moment ago, so one way to do it is with ICA. You just don't care. You just let it clean your data. For example, if you do retrocore, you pick a point where you assume, okay, this is my reference point in my readout, and I use this. And you use to resample your pulse oximeter or belt waveform to that point, and you do a deconvolution. Right. Yeah. No.
There must be a point of transition because layer MRI our data has become
Yeah, it does.
What I'm hearing is that you need a data set of fusion.
Yeah. No, if I'm honest now from personal experience, I almost never have this problem unless the person is a bad subject. But if you have a bad subject, then you have by data no matter what acquisition you use. So there is a lot of resolutions that we're looking at. It's just not that much physiological noise. I just don't see. Subject motion, yeah, of course, that's a problem. That's the problem, in fact. But yeah, so we could try with somebody that moves.
Typically, do you use ICA or you just don't?
No, it's just not much in there. Don't bother.
It's just that.
Yeah.
But isn't it the same effect that also drives our goal effect? Let's see if we, also the goal effect is terminal is smaller and smaller. So I wonder what the relative contribution to what goal is not compared to that.
Your contrast to noise stays flatter as compared to your signal to noise with respect to voxel volume. So you have the noise is proportional to the signal, right? And then you have the thermal noise component, you have physiological noise component. Thermal noise component is just there. The physiological noise component scales with your voxel volume and your signal intensity. So that has a faster decrease than your contrast, your bold effect.
Maybe that's different. Not so you don't need to go out and or negative, and they because they're relative. Given that the conditional is the same kind of thing, and yeah, I think it's just not surprising that if you have more thermal knowledge and other noise components that knowledge, it doesn't help us
Yes, but I mean, at some point you will not have enough signal. But what I'm saying is that your delta, your effect size, survives to a lower SNR than your physiological noise. Does that make sense? So I'm not quite sure what you mean by false negatives. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. 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 No, in that case, it's going to be a problem. Yeah. Yeah, I know. But again, that's something that you have to be careful with any kind of scan, right? Yeah. Okay, so I think that's the last slide for signal to noise. So if you don't correct for noise, in addition to what you were discussing, that you may end up with false positives, for example, you also end up with artifacts. And I think many people on the Siemens platform have seen that quite a few times. So if you have uncorrected shot-to-shot noise, you can have blurring, which is what physiological noise is doing here, but you can also have increased ghosting. So summary of overall properties so far for the 3D API. So slice profiles are actually ideal for, or much better for sub-millimeter resolutions than a 2D scenario. So you can actually increase your resolution quite a lot without worrying about leakage to other slices. Loss R can be quite fast, which of course with SMS is around now. It's not a true competition of the technique. Have good geometric distortions if you can increase your segmentation or reduce geometric distortion, sorry. High tempo SNR, which means high sensitivity. And the downside is more susceptible to motion and other sorts of noise within shots. But overall, 3D-EPI is actually becoming the standard for laminar MRI. I think you have witnessed it a little bit through all the presentations up to now. Now, I don't think I need to spend too much time on this because we already saw quite a lot of examples already. What does the signal look like from this kind of acquisition? Already, everyone has been talking about this. We have, I also talked about it yesterday. We have in our experiment of capillary bed, as you want to see, we have draining veins, draining veins. They give us unwanted signals. So we want to get rid of them ideally. And this is again work from Alessio with a 0.5 millimeter isotopic 3D-EPI. So to illustrate what you can detect basically in your ball signal at this very high resolutions. So here we have a T1 weighted anatomy and T2 star weighted anatomy, and zoomed, the zoomed panels focus here. This is V1. And we want to look at the spatial distribution of the ball signal to a visual image. So I want to highlight here, I'm moving the front because my cursor, I can see it, but you cannot see it. So in this case, we want to use the stereo-generic or layer 4 as an anatomical marker to evaluate where signals are localized. You can see the same thing in the star anatomy. And then in the zoom panels, T1, the star anatomy on the far right, and in the middle is the MRI. The one thing I always like to highlight is that if you do your fMRI at these resolutions, you have a lot of anatomical contrast in it as well. So we can actually see the stereo-generic in fMRI data as well, of course, more blurred. But looking at the bold activation map in this column, we get a very nice localization of a bold signal in this example. Right from layer 4, and you can see on top of it, something in front of you, signals coming from larger veins, or some are highlighted with blue arrows. So you can start separating effects from the different vascular compartments in space. So that was a visual example. If you take the profiles from a larger area that activated to this experiment, feed forward from the eye to layer 4, you want to see this bump that we have seen before, for example, Camille's presentation. But you also get other locations of the cortex that have more influence from the biovasculature. So you get different trends in your profiles. Here we're white matter, CSF, ball signal change. And those profiles are separated arbitrarily according to the trend they have towards the cortical surface. So this is a weak linear trend, middle, and large. In other words, for capillary bed weighted or layer 4 weighted, if you will, or bile vessel weighted. So again, another point is if you increase your resolution enough, you can actually separate, start seeing the effects of the different vascular compartments in your data directly. Now, the thing we wanted to look at is the spatial distribution of this trend. See if we can identify any pattern that correlates with, for example, curvature or vascular organization. This is what you see on the far right. So the color code is the same. Blue is a surface reconstruction from V1. Blue color code corresponds to the coffee profiles and so on and so forth. It's not very easy to identify a pattern. One thing we wanted to do, and we're still actually working on, is to correlate this kind of pattern with the visualization of the vasculature in the brain, which we get from this kind of scan. It's a very high resolution, 200 millimeter, 0.3 millimeter astropic anatomy. I don't know if this is visible very well, actually. Maybe you can see it on my screen later, but it's a scan that lets you see the intercortical veins quite well before the biopsy. Again, 3D-EPI. But yeah, we haven't finished that work. To correlate it directly, we're guessing that the pattern relates to the biovasculature. And what I'm showing you there is the dependence of the shape of your profile with respect to the orientation of the cortex to be not. So basically, you do have a bias as well, because each vessel is a cylinder with stability, and its orientation with respect to the not is going to affect the amplitude of the signal that you're going to get. So if we look at now this is the amplitude the reset. So we're looking at three different cortical locations. So we pick up a point in the profiles and plot how the amplitude changes depending on the orientation of the cortex with respect to the knot. Towards CSF, middle, and towards white matter. And what we saw is that indeed the amplitude can change quite dramatically, but not the shape of the profile. So it's another thing to worry about when you do laminar imaging, that sometimes the amplitude of the signal may just depend on the orientation of the cortex with respect to the knot. This is another view of the same anatomy.
So not too bad.
Yes.
You went to people far away to them. You mentioned something about this.
Let me see if I can remember. I think basic ones, I think TE is 30. So really, this is target. We want to see the vessels. That's why TE is 30. If we want to amplify that, TR is about 70, I think. Volume acquisition, it's an anatomical scan. Volume acquisition was about 2 minutes. Sense, I think we use surface coils and sense of total of 4, if I'm not mistaken. EPI factor 13, which means 13 lines of K space per segment. That's all I can remember at the moment. Does that help at all? So it actually looks beautiful. You can get amazing anatomies with 3D-EPI and very high resolution. So you can get a lot of information out of your data for layer analysis as well. I'm having a hard time seeing it, but you can see the layers very well. You can also see the vessels very well. From the fact it starts to look like a lake basically at the surface of the cortex, because you can start seeing where the bile veins are. And you can also get negative bolts as well, which at the laminar level, of course, much more noisy than your positive bolt. But this is an example of what we could actually get out of our data in this particular situation. So the experiment was a left-right visual presentation. So for example, to the right, you get activity in the left hemisphere. If you flip it, then you get suppressed activity on the same hemisphere. So those profiles are extracted from the same cortical location, and the color code indicates exactly the same location where these guys came from. So we can also do some, again, you should be careful because the signal is lower, but we can also do more elaborate experiments with negative bulbs. And just some examples of what time courses look like. Back to a more conventional resolution, I think that was 0.7 astropic and TR about 4. They don't look bad at all. So you actually have a lot of signal. The actual measured signal is an example from the middle of the cortex. The actual signal is highlighted with in the black line and the dots. And the blue is just to fit the database in this situation. And one more example of what happens to your bolt signal depending on your TR. So if you are able to scan very fast, if you may be able to do the 3D-EPI, you get something like the black curve. If you sample much slower, which we typically do with 3D-EPI at the moment, then your curve may look like the blue one. So of course there is an effect. This I think is for the same cortical locations, right? Same person, same experiment. You can appreciate the difference between the curves. It's not too bad, but there is a difference. And some just more examples from the literature. Again, also highlighting that distortions can be manageable for 3D-EPI, quite segmented scenario. The T1 anatomy, This is also if you want to navigate with an overlay with the area on here and activation in gray matter overlay that you want. An example from cerebellar fMRI, which is actually quite challenging because the activation foci are so small that if you start averaging between people, they disappear. So you want to have as much SNR as possible to be able to see small foci in activation. This is another way to look at columnar organization. So John mentioned yesterday about stripes in V2. So you can also do the same with the 3D-EPI and get stripes in V2. So just examples of the possibilities of the sequence. I think I'm done. I want to help a lot people that contributed slides and materials to my presentation. We've heard about them before. Ben and Ritzke, Alessio, you know who he is there, and a PhD student that now postdoc in our lab. And thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions. So you are great. Let's have